So welcome everyone to the sixth episode of Expert Speak brought to you by Creators of Product. Today we have Sanjay Swamy with us. Sanjay is an Indian technologist and VC and is a very common name for anybody who's in the startup arena in India. He's an expert on payments. He's right now managing partner at Prime Ventures, which is a seed stage VC fund based out of Bangalore and has invested in several category creating startups in India like EasyTap, SmartOwner, HackerEarth, HappPay, SignUp, CredX, and many more. He was earlier the CEO of mChek, and he has been an entrepreneur for a very long time. So the kind of experience he has, the years of experience he has, probably a lot of us in this call may be as old as the number of years of experience that he has.
Thank you.
We are very lucky to have him. Thank you everyone for joining in as well. Over to you, Sanjay.
Great. And I take it most of the people here are sort of tech product managers or um, engineers in tech companies, tech startups. Is that a good?
Yes, you would find a mix of product managers and other creators, engineers, and also some co-founders of
Awesome.
startups as well.
Awesome. So it's a relatively small group, so we'll try to keep this as interactive as possible. And it's not fundamentally a rocket science topic, but I always remember a quote from my dad from several years ago, which said, "Common sense is not very common." And this is one of those common sense topics that has guided me a lot along the years as I have been both an entrepreneur as well as, now a VC, but I still see myself as more of an entrepreneur than an investor per se. So it's a very favorite topic of mine and something that we see as an essential thing in our thought process at Prime, which is this whole topic of vitamins versus aspirins. Right? So our belief fundamentally is that people don't go to a startup for a vitamin, right? I mean, there will always be exceptions to everything I'm saying, but if I look at the core of why somebody buys something from a startup, right? And it's more obvious in the B2B world, but it's also true broadly in the consumer world, right? Is that the only reason people go to a startup is because whatever they wanted to get, they couldn't get it from an established player. People rarely go to a startup because something is 30% cheaper than a large player, right? People go to a startup because no trusted player has solved the problem that they need to see solved, and that problem is hurting them so much that they absolutely need to find a solution for it. And it doesn't matter that this is an untrusted startup that they're dealing with, because the problem is hurting so much. And that's where we came up with this analogy, and it has been documented. We're not the first to have put this analogy around of, is something a vitamin or is it an aspirin, right? And the logic being, the vitamin is something that is nice to have. If someone says, look, you have a vitamin C deficiency or a vitamin B deficiency or a vitamin D deficiency that probably all Indians actually have, you don't like immediately drop everything, go running to the medical store and buy vitamin D, right? You'd say, okay, you put it on your list saying next time I get a chance, I'll start buying a supplement, and that's good enough. But if you've got a splitting headache, and actually I was trying to play a clip from the Netflix series on the Chicago Bulls called The Last Dance, where they actually lost a game because, in the most important game of the year, because one of the players, in that case, Scottie Pippen, had a migraine and he just couldn't play, right? And he was on the court, but he was completely absent from the real game. And the reason is, a headache, you will take whatever it takes if somebody claims to have a fix, because it is just bothering you and you cannot think beyond that, right? So our feeling has always been, and if you look at a number of the companies that Divakar named, or companies like Reco, I know we have a person from that team here on this event, or companies like MyGate, or companies like mFine and things like that. These are all companies that we feel are aspirins to real problems. They are actually solving a headache, and nobody else is solving this problem, which is why it is essential for the customer to try them out, because there is no other alternative from someone that the customer already trusts. And that is what creates the opportunity, I feel, for a startup who has identified a pain point and has come up with a solution. And the best chance of succeeding is when nobody else is providing the alternative. It's not a question of cost. It's actually, in my mind at least, startups should not have, startups shouldn't have to discount or offer at the lowest cost, right? Startups are really all about solving a problem that nobody else has identified as a problem and doing a better job of it. Now, then there is the second part of are you 10x better, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, you've picked a problem to solve that is a pain point for people. And that's why it's deemed to be an aspirin, because aspirin is the one that solves the pain or the headache. So again, this seems like a very obvious thing to state, right? Nobody says I'm going to just build a vitamin for someone, and a nice to have. Everybody thinks they're solving a compelling problem for someone. So the question is, how does one go about identifying the pain points and so on? And I'll touch upon some of that and then more in the Q&A. Right? So, and while that is obviously always the case, especially in the time like now when it's a COVID world, you'll find that it is that much more important to make sure that you have an aspirin to a problem rather than the vitamin. So some of the characteristics of aspirins, right? They're solving real problems for customers, right? Customers start finding you. You are not going after the customers necessarily, right? People will come to you and say, I need this problem solved, right? So this is a classic sign whether you have an aspirin or a vitamin, right? This one says that you've got an aspirin because regardless of what you do, people are going to come and find you and say, can you please solve my problem? People don't discuss budgets with you. Right? People don't ask how much does it cost. People ask, can it solve this problem? That's the focus of the conversation, right? And that's ideal for all of us. People will look at you and say, I needed this yesterday, right? Where were you yesterday? So I'll give you an example of ZipDial, which I was also a co-founder of, which was a company that did, polling using missed calls, right? And Make My Trip, right? Since Amit is here from Make My Trip. I knew Amit Somani, and we had gone and we'd done a demo to Make My Trip. And the use case they said was, I wonder if this will improve our response rates after the customer had called the helpline, right? And we turned it on, and within 2 hours, I think we got a call from someone in the customer support team saying the response rates went from 0.5% to 9.5% within the last 2 hours. Right. So that was, again, that was a classic example, right? It didn't matter at that point what the price of the product was, because what really mattered was the success team was getting very little responses back from the field, and all of a sudden started getting 20x the responses, right? So there was actually some data that they could analyze, right? So for that particular problem, that use case, it seemed like it was clearly an aspirin to solve that problem. And people will use expressions like, oh my God, I needed you yesterday. Where were you all these days, right? So things like that feels really, really good. And broadly, people don't care if the product isn't perfect, right? And this is another thing, right? We as startups and as good product managers, we want to build the perfect experience, etc. But if it's an aspirin, right, you will find that it never has to be perfect to establish product market fit. Of course, to scale and things like that, and you should strive to get a great experience. But people will live with an imperfect product, right? And I'm sure every one of the startups that are represented here, for the first customer that you got, right? If you've had any level of success with customers, if you go back and think about it, it was a completely imperfect and inadequate product in your mind, but it solved the key pain point for that customer, and they were willing to live with all the other imperfections, right? There wasn't any self onboarding, no problem. We'll do some of that stuff offline. We'll upload all our data in Excel files. We'll extract it. Doesn't matter if you have a standard template. We'll cleanse the data. We'll do whatever, because it's solving the key problem that otherwise, we are struggling with. right? So some characteristics here you'll find, customers will find you. There is no question of a budget, because there is no budget defined, right? You're creating something new. They didn't have a budget for this, but they needed the problem to be solved. And imperfection is okay in the beginning. Whereas with vitamins, and I couldn't even think of too many real vitamins here. There are some products that are out there that I have very strong opinions about and think they are vitamins, but I won't name them because, one person's vitamin might be another person's aspirin, and I might get shot for naming some of the very favorite products that you guys might be using. But there are also different points in time where something is considered a vitamin, and it's not as essential a problem. And right now I could think of some examples around upgrading your car or buying better shoes. They just don't seem like immediate pain points that you're trying to solve, right? Whereas if I were to say that are you renewing your Zoom or your Hangout subscription, of course you're going to do that, right? That goes to the top of the stack, because all of a sudden today that is an aspirin, right? 3 months ago it might have been seen as a vitamin, but suddenly today it becomes an aspirin. So the most important thing, I think, and a slight deviation from the original topic, but the important thing for now is for entrepreneurs and product managers to think about, is my product a vitamin or an aspirin? And how do I transform it so that it is an aspirin and not a vitamin? I think that's the most important practical thing to think about today, right? Because the COVID era has transformed a lot of things, and we are hopefully coming into a post-COVID world. Depends on what the system and the government says tonight as well. It's a very important date. But broadly, as we come out of COVID, whether it is tomorrow or whether it is 2 weeks from now or whether it is 3 months from now, it is a new world, no matter what. Everybody's mindset has changed. Everybody's focus has changed. I think we can be very clear that we are moving into a world where people are going to buy what they consider essential, right? And in other words, in my words, what they consider to be aspirins. I guarantee you nobody there is waiting to say, let me just buy some frivolous stuff moving forward, right? It might happen. I think human beings also are, very short in our memory, and 6 months from now we might all be buying all the vitamins, but over the near term, definitely it's not going to be a vitamin mindset. So the product that you're building and that you're promoting has got to be positioned as an aspirin, right? So when some of these nonlinear events happen, you'll find this becomes more pronounced. When things are going well and things are growing very nicely, you'll find that we tend to get sucked into buying more of vitamins. But whenever these moments occur, and I've lived through painfully, the 9/11 event, I've lived through times where I didn't have a job. I was literally down to $200 in the bank account as a married student in Seattle, and I was very clear at that time. Life, you only bought what you absolutely needed to buy, and if you could avoid it, if you could borrow it from someone, you would do that, right? So from that point, and then having seen 9/11 and and the fallout from there, and then 2008 happened. While I was running mChek as a mobile payments play. You see my colleague from there, Suresh, was on this audience as well. When you go through these painful times, clearly the mindset shifts to a minimalistic mindset, and it's no doubt this is the first time where the entire world has moved into that. So survival will require that whatever you have has to be perceived as an aspirin and has to be positioned as an aspirin for whoever is your target customer. So, a lot of market changes in the business economics that you currently were experiencing in, say, February are no longer valid, no longer viable. Customer priorities have changed. What was important no longer is important. But you'll find that there may be other customers who need your product or service, right? So it was not seen as important for that segment, but all of a sudden it's going to become essential. And hopefully that's a very large segment, right? There might also be some regulatory changes that could occur, right? Demonetization was a great situation that occurred in India. And there were some big winners that came out of demonetization, right? So while you might look at it and look at COVID and say that, my God, this is a slowdown for almost everybody I can think of, and it's really hurting my company, there are actually 20% of the startups today that are seeing a massive boom in their experience. And Devakar and I keep exchanging notes on some of those companies. So you want to make sure that you're in that 20% no matter what, right? And that is the trick here to coming out of these situations that arise where you don't get caught in the mainstream, and how do you find a way to get into the 20% who is going to see a massive growth and pull coming out of these situations, right? And the only companies in my mind that do it are those that are providing aspirins. So some transformations, that are there, including one or two that are happening now. Obviously, BMO was one that literally PhonePe was born out of that. Paytm was, had explosive growth because of that. The whole UPI payments piece took off largely because of that. In fact, they are having the second boom now, right? Because nobody wants to touch each other. Nobody wants to touch cash. Even today, there was a fresh vegetables vendor that had come to my gated community, and he was very happy to take Google Pay, right, or UPI based payments. It would never have happened earlier, right? So but because of the fear of touching the notes, everybody is happy to accept, and everybody starts to prefer this, right? So these are these step function moments that have turned cash into the less preferred option here, right? Contactless delivery, right? None of us had heard of contactless delivery till 60 days ago, right? Suddenly Domino's Pizza announced it, Big Basket announced it, Amazon announced it, right? And we are starting to talk about infrastructure around contactless delivery, right? This could be a massive opportunity, but it never existed. The concept didn't exist, right? I've seen regulatory changes, and during our mChek days, for example, is when the two-factor authentication was introduced for e-commerce. The linking of Aadhaar to PAN, the linking of Aadhaar to mobile or bank account, these are all regulatory force changes, right? These lead to some really amazing opportunities, or any solution that facilitated it at that time frame, right? Every bank went and brought a 3D secure platform there were two companies in the world that had that solution, right? So literally it was eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and half the banks bought X and the other half bought Y, right? And that was it, right? No decisions, no questions asked, right? But basically the two of them could have named their price and they would have been in because there was a regulatory mandate there. So in all of these cases, when there is the step function event that occurs, right, suddenly things get transformed into aspirins. And if you're in that game, you need to focus on that. But I think you'll find also, if you look back, many of the companies weren't actually solving that problem, but they were close enough to solving the problem. And when the opportunity came, they grabbed the opportunity. So I thought I'll put a few pointers and then talk about a couple of examples, right, of how do you analyze this need and opportunity to transform your product from a vitamin to the aspirin, right? So the first question is, were you happy with the old world, and will your customers return to the old world, right? I think all of us now are in some way, shape or form in a lull where our business is, and we have no understanding of whether we are going to, of when we are going to get back to the old world. But there is broadly a sense of, is the old world coming back or not, right? So in certain cases, you'll say, yes, absolutely, the world will come back. And in fact, it's going to be even stronger, in which case it may make sense to just wait it out and just sort of sharpen your the tools. Or you might say the old world is just not coming back, right? Then the next question is, has the customer or the buyer's behavior changed? And how has it changed? And is that change permanent, right? So if you think about, again, digital payment acceptance in an offline business, for example, this is now, clearly this behavior has changed, right? Last week, I was at a panel event, which I was moderating, and I think the Razorpay founder was there, and a few other payments industry and fintech industry guys were there. The Policy Bazaar CEO was there. ET Money CEO was there, a few others. Clearly, categories where digital payments weren't being used are now starting to use it, right? And bill payments, it's just shot through the roof once again, because digital payments suddenly has become an aspirin, right? Until recently, for payment of utility bills and stuff like that, it was seen as an aspirin, as a vitamin. But now it's the only way you can pay your bill, right? And in the heat, of course, you cannot stay without at least a fan, and if not air conditioning. So, electricity is not an option. Therefore, digital payments suddenly became an aspirin now, right? Um, and I think this is a permanent change, right? Once you've tasted this, you're not going back to the old behavior, right? So for the most part. So this is a permanent change in behavior, right? Next question is this a better or a worse situation, right? And I think in many of the cases, you'll find some of these transformations that are occurring, billions of dollars of marketing could not have solved what something like a COVID has done, right? So mFine, which is one of our companies in the healthcare space doing telemedicine and teleconsult, right? They couldn't have asked for a faster customer adoption now of the service. Obviously, the circumstances may be tragic, but at the end of the day, from a business perspective, the opportunity is here and now, and they need to scale up, right? Zoom, as an example, has probably grown to 300 million users around the world. It's to their credit that they've, barring today, had almost no glitches along the way, right? But they grabbed the opportunity because suddenly they're seen as an aspirin from a nice to have. The one thing we tend to lose sight on are adjacencies, right? So sometimes you'll find that it may not be the core product or the same customer that you're serving, but there may be an adjacency, right? And this is the part where you need to do some testing very, very carefully before you go whole hog into it, right? So the product might be an adjacency, and I'll give you an example from our portfolio. We have this company called HackerEarth, which does testing for engineers, for software engineers typically. And they had a product for video interviewing, right? Which was there, it was seen as a nice to have. But all of a sudden now, video interviewing is becoming a very important thing, right? Some element of authentication built into video conference based interviewing and tracking of all the responses and things like that. So suddenly it was an adjacent product. It was there almost built like a hackathon type thing themselves, which is what they do. But all of a sudden it's taken a higher precedent, right? So think through that. And ultimately, from your startup's perspective, it's important to say, how do I benefit the most from it, right? So can somebody's on, it's a lot of background noise. Right. So how do you ensure that, you have the right focus so that you get the most out of this transformation opportunity, right? We had a couple of examples. I talked about the HackerEarth situation. We have this other company called Perpule that is doing e-commerce for groceries. Their core business was actually enabling the billing system for large retailers. And for those retailers now, nobody's coming to the store. Business has gone to zero. And since they were doing this, as a cloud-enabled system, they were suddenly able to put together an e-commerce front end and drive more business to the same retailers. Will it be a big hit or not? Time will tell. But this was an opportunity where it was an adjacent thing to their original business, and the opportunity was created for them to help those retailers to also start participating in the e-commerce business. The retailers clearly saw this coming 3 years down the road, but it looks like the opportunity is here and now, and that's why it suddenly has become an aspirin for them. So I'll pause here. I think the biggest thing I wanted to say was that, look, these moments and these opportunities don't come that frequently, and hopefully don't come that frequently given the circumstances this time. But when they do, I think it's critical for startups, for product teams, for entrepreneurs to very quickly look at, is there an opportunity here or not for me that I need to go after? And if there is, then do some controlled experimentation and very rapidly focus on ensuring that the product you're building is seen as more and more as an aspirin than a vitamin. Because I can guarantee you there is going to be very little discretionary spending over the next 18, 24 months. People are only going to buy the essentials. I don't think cost is necessarily going to be the most important issue as long as the cost is reasonable. But you will find some tremendous opportunities coming along the way. And you should be ready to grab it and make the most of it. So I'll pause here, and I would love to have more of a discussion rather than sort of Q&A, but happy to take any questions as well.
Thanks, Sanjay. This makes a lot of sense, and this is very relevant to the current time as well. Uh, let's have the floor open for discussion. To start the discussion, I had one question for you. What's your advice to companies that see a headwind right now, and to those that see a tailwind right now? Because one thing is very clear that is coming out, that nobody is unaffected. Either people are seeing a lot of impact in a negative way in their business, or they are getting pushed up. So to both these types of companies, what would you advise?
Yeah. So the first category of so my view is there are actually three situations here, right?
Yeah.
There are probably 20 to 30% of the businesses who are where the original business is dead, right? It's gone. It's not coming back for the next I would say 24 months at least, right? To be practical, right? And a great example of that would be corporate travel, right? I think
Yeah.
people have suddenly tasted the power of Zoom. They've realized that it does 70% of what they needed to do at super efficiency. So corporate travel, even if it becomes safe, etc., is probably not going to come back to 100%, right? And companies that were betting on that had better rethink the business. Um, the second is about 50% of companies will fall in this window where it's a 50 to an 80, it's a 3 to a 12-month delay in their business, right? Most likely between 6 and 9, right? And then there are 20% of the businesses for whom this is like a takeoff, right? I mean, the business is going like this and boom, suddenly, it's explosive growth. So for the first category, the answer to your question, what should we be doing? You have to reinvent yourself, right? And that's where, some of them might have raised money recently, and so might be capitalized well. And so you have the luxury of doing that. Some might be in deep trouble because you didn't have a lot of money and nobody's going to fund your existing business because it's going to be seen as a dead end. And there will be some unfortunate companies that will just not come out of this, right? And that's reality. That's life, right? That doesn't mean that you can't do something new again, but unfortunately, the business you're in, a small percentage of them will unfortunately will die, right? The big bucket, which is the 50% of the companies, is where the problem is, right? Because your business is going to come back. It's a matter of time. It's not a matter of whether, right? But also, how do I best utilize this time? Again, do I conserve cost? Do I keep people employed? Do I cut costs? So there is that side of it. But leaving that aside, right? I mean, I think these are companies that have to plan to make sure that ideally they don't want to get into a fundraising before June of next year, right? Because the market will want to see the rebound happen 6 months later, and for at least 6 months, and be sure of it before they start writing checks again. So in those cases, two things is, one is make sure that you have runway till the end of next year, at a minimum June, but ideally the end of next year. You shouldn't be fundraising in the year 2020. That's one. The second is on the business and product front, make sure that your customers and your existing customers in particular are really using your product a lot, right? It's less about are they paying you full price and so on, but make sure that you have them using the product and engaged in the product. I think you have tremendous, all of us have got a lot of product debt, at all points in time. You took some shortcuts, etc. This is a great opportunity to clean up. There's no question about that. So that's something that could be prioritized. The last thing is, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for companies in India, right? Why? Because from now on, all customers around the world are training themselves on how to evaluate and buy products online, right? Whether it's through recommendations from G2 Crowd or whatever is a detail, but customers are going to buy without meeting now. So what actually I feel is, for Indian companies, it's a great opportunity, because earlier, if you look at Indian companies that were targeting global markets, especially if you're B2B products, like SaaS products and so on, you typically still started with a direct sales model. Then you moved to more of an online model, and eventually you started targeting, maybe mid-market in the US, and then you raised another round and you hired somebody in the US and you set up a US office to do sales. But even if you are in Palo Alto, you cannot target a customer in San Francisco without a Zoom meeting, right? You can't meet them in person. So there's zero value to being physically co-located with the customer. And all of a sudden now your customer opportunity has become a global opportunity. So I think if you think about it that way, rather than feeling bad that, oh my God, the opportunity seems to have slowed down, I think there's another way to look at it would be to say, can I accelerate my international rollout plans, right? And so this is a great time to try this because you have nothing to lose, right? Because the local market isn't coming back anytime soon. The international market might not be out of reach, right? So it is a counter thinking, but that's important. And as far as the companies that having this 20% growth, this is what you live for, right? Pull everybody out, you're working 724, you're slogging right now, and just make sure you can keep the, plug all the holes, keep the system up and running, because this is what you live for. And you never thought it's like a Christmas that's come early in some ways. So I think the biggest question is around the 50% of the companies that are seeing the 6-month slowdown, and how do you utilize this time the most. Would love to hear from the team, from the going around also, what are you guys doing during this period of time? Right? And I really want this to be conversational. I think I learn as much from such interactions than just sharing my thoughts.
Sure. Why don't we have somebody share their views? Like I think I see Dalan also. Dalan, why don't you share what's going on with Microsoft, which is a little different from the rest of the companies that we are all from?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Sanjay. Hi, Diwakar. I think my experience probably will stand out here. And also because I work at Microsoft in Azure particularly, we've seen massive amount of uptake in terms of demand for services. What we're actually struggling with is the needs to fulfill that demand.
Yep.
But recently, our CEO also made a statement that we've seen 2 years of digital transformation, so to speak, in 2 months, and that's where we are. We've been working overtime, scaling up our services. We internally, I work in a monitoring team where we help other teams and customers set up monitoring services. We have gone into service mode. We no longer have time to help. The internal teams no longer have time to just come learn our product and things. We've gone like, okay, we build it for you. Just give us feedback later. So that's sort of I mean, it's a very different and lucky position to be in, that we're on the right side of what's needed in the world.
So I have a very close friend at Microsoft in Redmond who was chatting with me the other day, and they're all working from home again there as well. And he was saying that I think he's in the office online team, and he was saying that it is just crazy the managing the infrastructure, because the demand has gone through the roof. The Teams group as well, the demand has gone like crazy, right? And but this is the time when you're not complaining. Right? I mean, you could not have asked for a better outcome. Of course, everybody recognizes that the situation and the circumstances are tragic, right? But no, there's no second opinions about it. But these opportunities don't arise that often, right? And
for sure,
you grab them when they come, and do as much as you can. Right? And this will be the breakout opportunities for companies. Now, for the companies that don't find them in that situation, my goal with this talk was to say, figure out a way to get into that situation, right? Because it's of course, in Microsoft's case, they happen to be there, but it was a larger trend that they saw and they worked beautifully towards it. Zoom perhaps is a great example where they saw this trend happening, but this has sort of been Zoom could have completely flubbed it, right? If they had not ramped up their infra and, been on top. I mean, I guarantee you the Zoom team, probably like the Microsoft team, is working, 24/7, right? And they're probably ramping up really fast as well. I think closer to home, Big Basket, right, has seen a massive boom in thing, and they struggled for the first, 4 to 6 weeks before they actually got their act together. And more credit to them that they were able to ramp that up so quickly, right? Because there's a physicality involved in that business.
Yeah, as you said earlier as well, Sanjay, I think for India, I think this is especially for Indian tech scene. this is a massive opportunity right now, because we're not looking out for any sort of validation. There's so much to solve for India, for Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, very, very similar geographies. I've been lucky to work at least for Southeast Asia in this, and
Right.
products being made in India over next 3 to 4 years will start reaching a large chunk of the world. Uh, and as like for some companies, some places, it's definitely difficult, but the hope is that Indian tech should come out stronger from this. And on this, I also want to check with Ramit from Make My Trip. Uh, Travel is getting hit the max. How are you folks dealing with the sort of uncertainty and the difficult times in companies like Make My Trip? Ramit, you're there, right?
Yeah, it's on mute. I think he's on mute. Yeah.
Diwakar, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud.
Okay, cool. So just saying, I think from our perspective, I think like Sanjay was also referring to corporate travel being severely hit. And obviously at this point in time, mostly leisure travel is also hit. Like, I mean, nobody's traveling right now. So that's like a fact right now. But I think what we are trying to is, and I think we know from a business perspective, it is going to be impacted at least for 6 to 12 months for sure. And beyond that also. But I think what we are doing at our side is in this new world, like before people start venturing out again, which will be first will be mostly the critical needs, right, and some younger folks moving out to travel, right, and people, because there are certain pockets, there's certain segment of users who will be slightly lesser ready to travel, to venture out, rather than like families being venturing out. Like how do what our effort is, how do we cater to this new world with respect to safety and hygiene being the core to everything, be it a hotel, like working with hotel partners to make sure that we build that trust with the customers that the rooms and hotels are sanitized enough, right? And there is hygiene factor to it. And so it's not only a hotel level problem across the board, be it airlines, working with airline partners to make sure that how can we kind of make sure that throughout the complete your journey, like we make sure that safety is there. And same for bus operators, through cab operators, because that is going to be a very critical element whenever travel starts picking up, hopefully maybe July onwards. So that's what our focus. And obviously all the post-sale experience that is super critical right now, because essentially it's more about handling refunds, cancellations, which is seeing almost 10x, 20x escalations compared to normal times. So like whatever we can build from a product standpoint to solve for pains there.
Yeah, travel's probably the hardest industry that, from a hit perspective, right? I think manufacturing, a lot of these other things will eventually come back, and there it's a matter of time. I think travel is probably the one where there is an element of if, right, and it's not clear, right, and I think the companies, certainly a company like Make My Trip has got several assets that it could build on top of, and certainly a brand that will stand it in good stead. But if I was a younger early stage startup right now, I would be probably in deep trouble. They wouldn't have the staying powers.
Ramit, you want to ask a question as well? You had written on chat.
Sorry, I don't see the chat myself. I'll stop sharing the screen because I'm not seeing the chat.
You can just they can coexist, the chat and this. So Ramit was actually asking that beyond the product being an aspirin and decent market,
That's right.
what are 2-3 other most important things you look in a company before investing in them?
Okay. It's a different topic, but as a VC, we are a seed stage VC, right? So seed and seed is probably the max we would do from entering a new company stage. I think if I look at every company that we've invested, barring probably a couple of them, MyGate probably is the one exception I would think of, where the plan broadly has been has played out according to what the founders thought was going to happen. In most other cases, the plan evolves a lot, right? So I think while it might sound cliched, I think venture capital is really a people business, right? And which is also why, as much as I would love to be investing in several of the startups right now, getting a read on how it is to work with these young founders, young as in at least young from a perspective of the startup, but in many cases it's also the age as well, and how they are going to respond to the change that's going to come about is probably the most challenging thing to evaluate during the early stage, right? So um, while everybody uses the word team, for us, at least at Prime, when we look at a team, the most important thing is, have they faced any adversity and how will they be in the face of adversity, right? I think that's the hardest judgment, right? So in the case of MyGate in particular, it was very obvious because Vijay was a ex-Air Force guy. He had flown during the tsunami. He had flown a sortie in the night in Car Nicobar, rescued 200 people off rooftops, and this and that. There is nothing that is going to come about, or is highly unlikely there's anything that's going to come about that's going to shake him, right? Okay, so that's like a major checkbox for us, right? So the team, in terms of their ability, how close they are, how well-rounded they are, how complementary they are to each other, but how aligned they are in the goal and the mission. That is probably the single biggest thing for us. And I do know that I personally actually don't even care about the Excel projections, right? And we do have associates, we do analyze it, we do come up with our own modeling and so on. But to me, the only guarantee is whatever is on the Excel is what's not going to happen, right? We have no idea what's going to happen, but we know that this though is definitely not going to happen, right? So it is a VC founder relationship, especially the way we like to work closely with the teams, is very much a, it's at least like a 7-year, if not longer, marriage of sorts, right? So we have to be willing to accept that things are going to go wrong and that we are going to work together to resolve it, right? There will be surprises. You can never think of all the scenarios and possibilities, but can we work together, and with a very clear expectation, of course, that we can be a guide. We might very often be wrong. The founders will be the ones closest to the business, but and they will know the business better, but can we at least discuss and brainstorm and evaluate possibilities, and without appearing like we're judging each other, right? So that's very important to us. We have to build a big business together. We're not in it trying to say we're not judging each other beyond a certain point. We're only interested in knowing, can we work together here, right? So those, I think, are the important things for us, right? It's not just the business plan that's presented to us.
Yeah, understood. Thank you.
Sure.
Are you sure also pinging and asking for a question, right?
Yeah. Hey, Sanjay. I had a question which I think a lot of young people here will resonate with. So since the job market is so uncertain and there's so much uncertainty overall, what do you think? What kind of companies one should be looking out for, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I think if I think about what will we back as Prime, right? And we're probably an indicator of what the industry is thinking. Anything that is so anything that is driving digitization, right, is bound to be a winner, right? Whether that specific company will succeed or not, I don't know, right? But the digitization of anything is bound to happen now, right? So from a skills perspective, from a which company you join that you're betting on as well, right? Obviously, there will be some company-related stability issues. Do you really believe the founders, etc.? But I think if it is pulling in the direction of saying that an industry which was a very offline industry is now going to get digitized, I would say, it's got solid potential, right? And what would we back as a VC, right? It's almost the same question that you're asking me, right? Which is, we would back anything that we think is getting a tailwind from COVID, right? I shouldn't say anything, but that is like an important criteria for us outside of the team and all of that, right? Whereas if it's a company that we feel is going to be sort of slowing down right now because of COVID, or there is no way to spin the pitch so that it's going to get an acceleration because of COVID, then our view is, well, we could wait 6 months and see, right? It might be a great company, I don't know, but there is no reason for us to take a risk right now, right? And we are investing with other people's money because venture capitalists raise a fund. You are investing with your life and with your career, right? So you should think of it the same way. What would I have invested in, right? And I think whoever is getting a tailwind from COVID is obvious. COVID is going to drive a lot of inefficiencies out of the system. COVID is going to make everybody a digital business. If you're in that space, absolutely something to think about. If you're doing a startup, whether it's of your own or your friends are doing a startup and you want to be an early employee in the company, you have that opportunity. This is a great time because the best companies are formed now, right? It's heavily cliched, but it's also proven over a period of time, right? Yeah. I think the VC industry is far happier taking, smaller dollar amount risks, investing in earlier stage companies and seeing what happens there. There is actually less pressure on the startup to, just keep proving, because people are patient in how they build the companies now. And once again, the post-COVID mindset, the buyers are going to say, okay, this is a real pain point for me. I have to solve this pain point. And as long as you're doing that and it's for a large enough target market, it's a great time to either start up or to join an early stage startup, right? Now that depends on whether you have personally, staying powers for 18 to 24 months, so I don't know, that will depend on your situation. But the safe thing to do right now, and I apologize to my friend at Microsoft here, would be to go join Microsoft, right? And you'll get fantastic experience as well, right? Because they're also seeing massive amount of scaling up that's happening. Yeah. But the most exciting startup opportunities will also happen right now.
Correct. Yeah.
There's actually one topic which I wanted you to touch upon. You already answered that. Yeah. Is it a good time for people to start?
But it's always a good time for people to start. It's a great time right now.
Yeah. Right now it is definitely a great time, and I think you touched on that very well as well. That it's also a great time to join early stage companies, because one more thing which at least I'm seeing very well is that I think right now it's also a little easier to measure how good the companies are doing and if what they're building is value generating. So. Yeah. The thing that you shared, that right now most users are going to focus on essentials and not on delight or just vanity stuff, is a great sign of figuring out that which companies will thrive and which will not. Unit economics is hopefully back on the cards, which has been one of the complaints from the whole startup world, that the unit economics are not so clear. But right now the companies are showing signs towards building businesses which are sustainable as well.
See, I started this entire call with the statement, common sense is not common, right? And we're going back to a mode now where people are going to make decisions based on common sense, right? And common sense is that, as a business, you may choose to lose some money in the beginning, but there is no business to be made if you're not eventually going to be making money, right? So it's I think you will also, right, as an entrepreneur and certainly as an early employee, that you're not playing a valuation game, right? Create value. Valuation will be an outcome of creating value. It's never a goal. And I think every startup that has chased valuation as a goal has failed, right? Even to the extent where post IPO, perhaps it implodes, right? Or and we have seen several of these stories in the recent months. I don't want to belabor them, but companies that have created solid value. Like you look at Zoom, right? He raised a Series A at 24 million. He raised a Series B at 49 million. He never raised any other money, right? Just one second, I'm getting a call. Huh? Hello? 1 second, sorry. So I think, broadly, just focus on doing the right thing and doing things right. Good things will happen. And the beauty of this period is actually nobody is judging you. Like, for example, a lot of VCs talk amongst ourselves as to what is a good company, what is a good year for a company in the year 2020, right? I think the general mindset is if in December you're at your February revenues, you have done well. That was a shock to me. I mean, I'm also post my becoming a VC, I'm seeing this for the first time, this massive sort of drop off. And it's really a question of can we in December be where we were in February, right, with the same prospects, right? So VCs are ready to write off an entire year, right? If in September you're back to your February revenues, you have done very well. You're way ahead of the curve. Right now, as an entrepreneur, you might be beating yourself saying, oh, shoot, I am not seeing any progress. I'm not seeing any sales growth. My customers are, falling like 9 pins. Am I in trouble? So, which you should be, and you should be worried about these things. But the reality is actually, probably it's okay, right? And this is the one time in life where people are not saying, aha, I told you that company was screwed up, right? Because nobody has anything better to say, right? So you actually have a window of opportunity where you can focus on doing the right things.
Yeah, totally agree to that. I think it's also a good time for people to build companies anywhere in the country or actually in the world. Like,
right.
People don't have to be in Bangalore or in NCR or in the hot spots of the world, right? Now is the opportunity to you can choose to be anywhere and still build companies with people. And
that actually, I have an opinion on. I think, ultimately we are going to get back to offices and we are going to work. I don't think this work from home is going to be forever. And I think, if you look at the US as well, and with Silicon Valley and now a little bit in New York area and stuff, there are these hubs, right? And eventually, ultimately, your business is going to be driven by the talent you have, right? That is the primary driving force. And you are only going to do one startup once. Why would you want to take a chance, right? Get into one of the hubs. I plan to be in one of the hubs, right? Don't kid yourself that, oh, I will be the first ever entrepreneur from Bhopal. Nobody gives you any medals for doing that, right? Build the biggest business, right? I can see even Indian companies. I look at companies being acquired in Silicon Valley for, I don't know, $160 million, which have like epsilon compared to some of the IP that's created in the companies here, right? We're just in the wrong place, right? So don't kid yourself. I think, it's an opinion I disagree with a little bit, Divakar, but, give yourself the best chance for the best outcome possible. Because the only thing that is non-scalable in this entire thing is the founder's time, right? That's the only non-scalable thing that you've got here in this equation. So try to figure out the maximize the way. And the other advice I always give founders use this time. Try to make sure you are offloading all the non-strategic things you're doing. This is a great, how do you use this time? Anything non-strategic that you've been working on, find somebody on your team who can take it, or find somebody who can do that work, or and get automated, do whatever you want to do, right? I know one of my colleagues is here on this call as well. We have been using this time to build a lot of automation within the fund, right? Because we do a lot of stuff that is like, sort of, not really very scalable, like like we have to report to our LPs and things like that. And we're trying to say, let's use this opportunity here to just build a lot of automation, right? Because it's a waste of my time prettying up Excel sheets.
Yeah, makes sense. Any
By the
other?
way, I want people to challenge some of what I'm saying also here. You know,
Yeah,
I like to be provoked, and I'm probably wrong in several of my thoughts as well. But I'd like to hear the counterpoints of you.
yeah. Does anybody else believe that we'll have more companies coming outside Bangalore as well?
Yeah, I do think so. I think to some extent, it is a great leveler in a sense. And because there are a lot of opportunities which exist outside of metros for sure. Obviously, very different from metros, but I think nothing stops them to kind of build a great business as somebody who is based out of metros, right? So, but I feel like I think a lot of more startups are going to come out of smaller cities in the next 6 months, and this is basis my interactions with some of my friends who from college are not in metros, who are in, let's say, towns like Patiala, Ludhiana, Chandigarh, right? So Chandigarh, I mean, it's still not a metro, but yeah. So I mean, some great work happening there. People, maybe the size of the population is small, and that maybe is a factor of the outcomes. But yeah, a lot of great work happening in smaller cities as well.
Yeah. So I have no doubt there is a lot of there will be a lot coming out of everywhere, and that there will potentially be some really amazing ones. I always look at it and say this is a business of risk, right? And as a founder and as an investor, we're really just playing the odds of the risk, right? And saying how
Yeah.
do we de-risk, how do we de-risk, how do we de-risk? And to
Right.
me, getting the best team into the company is the only sure shot proven way of de-risking, reducing the risk to a minimum, right? Whatever is the way to make that happen. And my belief is co-location is one of those very important things. I don't think this current model of saying work from home, as much as every one of my startups has said efficiency has gone through the roof, right? But I think they're all expecting that at some point they will get back to at least twice a day, people are going to see each other face to face, right? And I think if you're a founder of a company in Patiala and you're expecting over a period of time that you're going to build a large company, and this is only for the building the large company situations, right? And in doing so, you're going to need to bring in top class management and top class resources, which are clearly not there right now, at least in Patiala. You are going to eventually need to move out. I don't think it's going to be feasible right now. I think ideas will originate, prototypes will originate, initial costs will be very low. You can validate a few things, absolutely. But eventually, I think if those companies end up being very successful, it will be an exception that the company would continue to be based there, and more likely that it would have moved out. At least that's what I would bet on, right? As a VC, at least I would say, okay, if you're never going to move out of there, okay, now there has to be something super exceptional about the founders. I think that was my point.
Yeah, makes sense from a bet
In
perspective.
terms of money or resources in terms of something else?
See, I think money is never an issue for good companies. Money will find the good companies, right? I think it is everything. It is the people.
All right. So when it's people, so don't you think, like, I mean, even if founders are co-located across multiple locations, I mean, that can work. Obviously, it's not as good as like you are being at the same place and working from the same place. But I mean, if the people are right, maybe they can also make it work from co-locations as well, right?
I don't think there is any question in my mind that it could work.
Okay.
I'm saying how do you maximize the probability that it will work, right?
Okay.
So minimize all those risks, right? I mean, you are getting this window of opportunity, which is going to be 2 years before somebody else also realizes this is a great opportunity, comes in with a lot of capital and a kick-ass team that, 3 guys out of Ola come out and they've seen scale, they have access to capital, they have all these things, using Ola just as an example. So how, you have that window of opportunity, you have to maximize the probability of success.
Yeah.
That is my only point.
Yeah.
It's not about when you start.
Yeah. Understood.
And in fact, always take this example of Sampath at Instamojo, right? He was in Mumbai. He was not in like a tier 2 town or anything like that. But he said, look, if I have to build this into a big company, and he might be wrong, who knows, right? But at that point, he said, look, if I have to build a kick-ass company, and if I have to have the Silicon Valley DNA, if I have to have the tech resources or access to the tech resources, I have to be in the heart of Koramangala, Bangalore, right? It was a call he made, and he made a bold decision, moved the entire team lock, stock, and barrel, right? It was a painful, tough point at that. And I mean, we're not investors in Instamojo, but I know him very, very well. And he made the call, right? And I've seen a couple of my companies also move from Mumbai to Bangalore or from Chennai to Bangalore for their particular team. It seemed like it was the best thing to do. So these are not from an Indore or a Bhopal or a Jaipur. It's actually from other large cities itself where there was talent, but they felt the culture and the DNA was still not there.
Yeah. So I think understood. So I think just on a lighter side, I think it's also an opportunity. How does this ecosystem, which is present in Bangalore as in Delhi, can be made available to people outside of that? These cities also, like, which is probably is an opportunity. Like, how can this ecosystem be more like liquid and available to a larger pool than just these cities? Yeah,
I think that's the government's goal also. As a venture capitalist or as a startup capitalist that each of us is, right? You're betting on your company, right? And we as VCs bet on a handful of companies, right? I always just look at it and say, look, it's a game of probability, and how do you maximize your chances?
Oh, yeah, understood. Thank you. Yeah.
Sure. Cool. Any other questions or points?
We can take one more question or point from anybody if we have, or we have already crossed the time, so we can wrap up also. And any questions from anyone?
So I made one more point. I wanted to see if people had an opinion, right? Which is this an opportunity for Indian companies to start tackling customers who are in other parts of the world, right? Has this suddenly created a bigger opportunity for us rather than worrying about has it created a smaller opportunity?
I have an opinion on that, but I'll hold that before somebody else speaks on that. Maybe Amir, Vineet, Vignesh, one of you could share your views on whether you think this is a great time for Indian companies to build for international audience. Anyone? Seems people are shy about answering this. But I think it's a great opportunity, Sanjay. Multiple reasons for that. First, one of the biggest reasons is that India has become a huge playground itself because of the high internet penetration. Because if you look at some of the Indian examples of Geo and Daily Hunt and Hotstar, the kind of scale that these companies have seen is insane, like hundreds of millions of users, which has created that kind of product culture, building product companies in India as well. Like with Gojek also, we build an sort of Southeast Asian company, mostly from Bangalore. A large chunk of our team has always been in Bangalore. So we would spend time here, there, build companies, build products for them, try to understand their user behavior, their language, and then build for it. And I think we have done an okay job doing that. So Gojek is just one example, but there are various other examples where companies are now thinking about India as their center. So another company that I'm working with is in Africa. It's in Central Eastern Africa, and they're also looking at India as the hub that would drive their products and tech. So while this was always on the edge that yes, India could be the next place to build all the tech for the world, and we have always been, but more from a services perspective. But now with the whole ecosystem that you talked about, has scaled and validated itself. So my guess is that in next 2 to 3 years, uh, this is just my guess and my opinion, the way China has established itself as sort of the exporting and manufacturing hub, and it's very difficult to shift it. India has the opportunity to establish that from here, and that's where I differ from your earlier point about being in one large city.
Mm-hmm.
These kind of products and companies, smaller ones building for the rest of the world also, will come from a lot of smaller towns as well. Because I'll give you an example. Just day before yesterday, I was talking to a guy who's building a product for Indian small shops in tier 2, tier 3, and he and three of his partners are working out of a place called Piparia, which is somewhere deep inside MP, and like it's not Bhopal. So Bhopal is quite far away from there. So from Bhopal to one satellite town, and from that satellite town to Pipari. So they're building it out of there. So I'm very bullish on both the things, that Indian smaller towns will peak in terms of tech talent, and secondly, India building for outside, especially for the regions which are very similar to India, Southeast Asia and Africa being the first two.
Got it. Cool.
And we
Yeah,
have
will be.
that we were discussing last week also from your portfolio as well. I think you were asking on Twitter also in an interesting.
No, but that's built very much in Koramangala and HSR layout.
Yeah. And that's being built for outside, for the world.
Yeah. See, I think my whole point is ultimately startups succeed because they get amazing committed talent and they execute brilliantly. And access to that talent is the hardest thing, right? So the same company that you're talking about in Piparia, if they did want to hire, 5 top data scientists, right? They're not likely to find them there. They're not likely to. I'm not saying they won't find them there, right? And the ability to attract, 6 people out of, a Swiggy and a Dunzo and a Make My Trip or wherever, and say, hey, come move to Piparia and let's start working, right? It's just going to be difficult, right? That is my only point.
That would never happen.
Yeah. So
But
they may I'm fully expecting they could originate from these cities or towns or villages. But at some point, if they have to hit some scale and build a strong team, along the way, some major movement will need to happen in that company, right? And it's hard to build like a team elsewhere, distributed teams, right? That's still an unproven thing. There will be some companies that are capable of it as well, right? And that's my whole point, which is, at least as a founder, take the least number of risks for your company.
That's true.
Or these types of risks, right? These are solvable risks, right? And of course, if you don't have the money and all that stuff, it's fine. But I think broadly, the company has a shot at building a large play. Money will find you. So don't let money be the reason why you constrain your strategy.
Yeah, but do you also believe that a lot of B2C companies and like we have seen services and SaaS companies out of India for sure, but it might be time for B2C companies also to come out of India in coming years?
So I think founder market fit is something also that's very important, right? So if the founders have a very strong, so the challenge with B2C is that it's very hard. Consumers are quite similar in many ways. They're quite different in many ways as well, right? So if you have not lived in that environment and not firsthand experienced the environment, right, it's just very hard. Like, you've spent a lot of time now with Southeast Asia, but prior to that, it would have been very hard for you to imagine the product unless you were convinced that the demographic and the thought process and the buying behavior in that particular market is identical to what you have already experienced, right?
Yep.
So, for example, if one were trying to build a product for the Australian market, right? I would say it's not going to be very easy for Indian companies to build a consumer product unless the founders have lived in the Western world or in the developed countries, or have a very strong sort of awareness of what's going on in those markets, which means they're going to spend some time there. You have to be closest to the customer, right? The way businesses run are probably more similar than the way consumers think, which is why B2B products are more likely to succeed. Or you pick a target geography which looks and feels and smells very much like India. Maybe not the smells part, but looks and feels very much like India. And then you have a good shot at succeeding there as well. So, I think it's a matter of time, although the world is flattening, we are starting to experience a lot of the rest of the world through, Amazon Prime and Netflix and all of these other things. So maybe culturally things are getting closer and closer here and will become possible. I think this decade is the decade of SaaS, and Indian SaaS companies are going to have a monster opportunity. Companies that are able to, because SaaS companies in India have already proven that they can build world-class products on par with the best. I think the ability to sell from India will become even stronger now, because the customer willingness to buy from global providers will go through the roof. And so I think that's the biggest opportunity that I'm excited about in terms of not necessarily serving only the Indian market.
Yep, I totally agree with that, and that's something which we have been good at as well. Because writing software and building tech versus building product and understanding the users, for that you have to be there, which you rightly pointed out. You have to build for Australia or Southeast Asia. It's very difficult to just keep assuming and building from here.
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. Thank you very much, Sanjay, for taking out your time on us every evening. And
thank you. And just one closing thought. It's an amazing time right now. I know it is very challenging for all of us emotionally, physically, just staying at home, doing a lot of, hopefully helping around when doing a lot of the household chores, which we're not necessarily all used to. But make sure, you're staying very, it's also a time to introspect and stay very focused and come out very strongly. And I know it's a matter of time. It's not a question of if. So happy to interact with you guys offline. I appreciate your setting this up, Devaka, and all the best.
thank you very much. My pleasure. I think we had some concerns with Zoom. I just checked on Twitter also. A lot of people are facing Zoom outages as well, because of which some people couldn't attend. So we'll share the recording with them so that they can also view this.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.